Thank you, Sharon. That was very warm. And it's my honor to be here and speaking to you about something that's very, very close to my heart, living kidney donation. So I will start my talk with this slide. It's a very, very historical slide. This is Dr. Murray performing the first ever kidney transplant. This is in Brigham, now in Boston, and this is 1954. And this is at a time where there was no dialysis. There was no PD, there's no hemodialysis. So this was really the first ever form of renal replacement therapy. And this was a very auspicious start to the field of renal replacement therapy and kidney transplant. Now this is the donor and recipient of the first ever kidney transplant. To your left is Ronald Herrick. He's the brother who donated a kidney to his twin brother on his right, that is Richard Herrick. Now, a lot has changed ever since. Since 1954, we are in 2022. There's been advancements in the field of immunosuppression. There have been advancements in the field of surgery. We are doing robotic surgeries now. Kidney transplants are lasting much longer. We have more regulatory oversight on transplantation. The NOTA Act came into being in 1984. We are being more sophisticated with the way we are transplanting organs. We are doing kidney paired donors. We are doing national chains, international chains. And organ transplantation has sort of expanded to include people of all ethnicities and all backgrounds. But there's one thing that hasn't changed. That is, well, two things. One, that receiving a live kidney transplant is still the single best option for patients with end-stage renal disease. And unlike any other specialty of medicine, we are potentially endangering the health of one person over the other. Now, circling back to where we started. Well, Richard Herrick, who was the recipient, went on to lead a healthy life. He had kids. Ronald Herrick, who was the first living kidney donor, in 2010, he passed away at the age of 79 of heart disease. What's striking is that he spent the last 10 years on dialysis. So that brings me to our topic of today's discussion, living kidney donation and how it's evolved from 1954 when Dr. Murray performed the first transplant in Harvard to now. So briefly, I will review kidney transplant trends in the United States and why do we need living organ transplantation. We'll review the currently available data on donor outcomes. We'll pay attention to specific subgroups, African Americans and women of childbearing potential. And also review some of the ethical challenges in living donor kidney transplantation, including what's our government's perspectives towards incentivization of living donation. Those of you who deal with transplant probably have been hearing about it. There's been a lot of buzz around incentives and disincentives in living organ donation. So first of all, why do we need more people to donate their kidneys? Why do we need more living kidney transplants? And the answer lies in our kidney waiting list. All of you are well aware that kidney wait list is increasing, and there's been a huge gap in the demand and supply of organs. And living kidney donation plays a very crucial role in maintaining this shortage of organs. What are the advantages of living donor transplant? There's no waiting time as opposed to 3-5 years of wait, and it's reaching 10 years in some states, California, and in Texas, I believe it's 5 to 7 years as well. Living kidney donors last longer for obvious reasons. Donors are healthier. An average living donor is going to be healthier than an average deceased donor. There's a shorter warm ischemia time or ischemia times. There's less chance of delayed graft function, less rejection because you're related. A lot of times you're related to your recipients. And this is a scheduled surgery. You can make sure that your recipient is in perfect state of health before you call them in. You don't have to call somebody in the middle of the night when they are going on dialysis, scheduled dialysis. So you can schedule it when your donor is in great state of health, your recipient is in great state of health. It leads to better patient survival and, of course, reduced healthcare costs long term. This is a landmark study. It was published in Transplantation in 2002, old study but very relevant. And they compared the patient outcomes, renal transplant outcomes in patients who've been on dialysis from 0 to 6 months versus who've been on dialysis for more than 24 months. And what they found was that patients who received a transplant while they were on dialysis less than 6 months lived longer than the patients who waited for a long time before receiving a transplant. That goes to prove that waiting time on dialysis is the strongest modifiable risk factor for renal transplant outcomes. Okay. Now these were same kidneys. One kidney, 2 organs are procured. One kidney goes to a patient who's been on dialysis less than 6 months. The other dialysis more than 2 years, right? So same organs, but the only thing that differed was these patients were on dialysis for less amount of time. And there lies the opportunity for living organ donation. These people, you transplant them sooner. You don't have to wait for 3 to 5 or 10 years on dialysis till a deceased donor becomes available. Now, this slide goes to show, and we've probably seen this multiple times, survival probabilities across all renal replacement modalities. You compare hemodialysis versus peritoneal dialysis versus deceased donor kidney transplant versus living donor kidney transplants. And patients who receive a living donor transplant, which is the last bar, which is the lightest blue bar, they tend to live the longest. So there's no doubt that living donor transplant offers you highest survival than all other forms of renal replacement therapy. Now, for those of you who've been to Brussels, Belgium, this is the piss mannequin. And what does it do? It's been peeing since 1619. And what's the goal of transplant? To make sure our patients keep peeing. So, well, we can't quite get there, but the closest thing to there is a living donor kidney transplant, once a patient, of course, has ESRD. So when we look at graft survival, expected graft survival for living donors is 95% at 1 year, 80% at 5 years, and 50% of those kidneys are still working at 18 years. I see patients in my practice who received kidney transplant in 1972, 1979, still come to me with a creatinine of 1.5, 1.8. So great survival benefit as compared to deceased donor transplant. Now, how has living kidney donation sort of evolved in the global context? It's being done right now in 94 countries. There are about 27,000 registered living donor transplants per year registered. There are some happening illegally across the world. 40% of kidney transplants are from living donors. And the number is actually rising in many countries. Unfortunately, that's not the true for the United States. And the reason is, in the beginning, when transplantation became sort of available, people would come forward. Deceased donor techniques were not that evolved, and living organ transplants were increasing to the point that about 2004, 2005, living donor transplants in the United States overtook the number of deceased donor transplants. But over time, there was a decline. Initially, we thought, it's probably just an aberration. 2 or 3 years, it'll pick up. But unfortunately, that's remained same over years and years and years. And COVID has just made it worse. So what are some of the causes? Why are people not donating in the United States? And what are some of the causes for this initial increase and now the decline? Now, in 2005, the way the organs were allocated, the deceased donor organs were allocated was changed, and it prioritized pediatric recipients. So when we look at, the motivation to donate, the parents of pediatric recipients were donating and their relatives, that motivation sort of went away because in many ways this was a welcome step. You want those pediatric recipients to get transplants sooner and not wait on dialysis. But it did have some unintended repercussions where less and less donors were now coming forward. And also, you look across the country, there's rising rates of obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and CKD. And if you look at the slide, now this is a heat map of, on the top, it's the heat map of obesity and diagnosed diabetes in the United States. And just look at how it's changed over the years. The top bar is obesity from 1994. So the yellows are with less incidence of diabetes, and the redder it gets, it's more incidence of diabetes and obesity. And across the board, you see now more and more states have more than 20% of population that is either obese or diabetic. And these are the patients we're deriving our donors from. Our donors are you and me. And if the baseline population is not healthy, of course, not many people are going to be approved as donors. So that's one of the reasons why the rates of donations have declined. Now, if you look at the heat map for hypertension, CKD, it's going to mimic the heat map of diabetes and obesity as well.